Hello everyone, and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Tuesday, February 21st, and I hope you all are having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world, so stay tuned. As always, I'm going to start off with our Techstrong news recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. Then we'll air 2 sessions of the DevOps Experience 2022. In the first session, Tracy Reagan, CEO of DeployHub, will explore what IT teams are doing to incorporate security policies into the DevOps pipeline and the challenges they must overcome to get there. Then, Stephen Chin, Vice President of Developer Relations for JFrog, will explore how the IoT explosion is impacting organizations and what they need to do to prepare for this next wave of DevOps challenges, including what considerations should be made for the rapid pace of software development and updates, distribution tactics, the ability to roll back updates when needed, and more. Then, Bonnie meets with Alex Rappaport, CEO and co-founder of Twitter, to discuss the company, a wastewater reprocessing startup tackling the global water crisis. Then we go to Mitch for the second part of a 2-part discussion with authors and DevOps experts John Willis and Bill Bensing to discuss the second half of their book, Investments Unlimited, including information about DevSecOps, shift left, pipelines, software decomposition analysis, and more. We will then air an episode of Techstrong Research Review. In this episode, Mike tells some stories from his trip to Asia, and then he and Mitch discuss the evolution of networking in a cloud-native world. Then, to wrap up this broadcast, we will have 2 episodes of View with Vizard. In the first episode, Mike Vizard interviews Bob Maley, Chief Security Officer for Black Kite, as Bob explains why, despite economic pressures, it's not likely cybersecurity teams will be able to do more with less, so the focus needs to be on making the right strategic investments. Then, Mike interviews Uncork CEO Gary Hoberman, as Gary explains why the key to unlocking productivity is to rely more on a platform that doesn't require application developers to write a single line of code to build even the most complex applications. That's what we have coming up for you on this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for February 21st. First up, the U.S. Supreme Court will listen to arguments today and tomorrow about 2 important cases related to online speech and content moderation. The focus of these discussions will be about Section 230, a federal law that has received criticism from both parties, but tech companies and digital rights organizations consider essential for the internet as we know it. If the court rules against the tech industry and narrows Section 230's legal protections for websites and social media companies, this could lead to online platforms being exposed to a range of new lawsuits regarding how they present content to users. Section 230 was enacted in 1996 during the early days of the World Wide Web and recognized that the internet was in its early stages and that website owners risked being sued for things that other people posted, which could stifle development. The U.S. Supreme Court is considering whether to take on additional cases that could have implications for Section 230, and members of Congress have shown a renewed interest in scaling back the law's protections for websites. So we have to stay tuned to see how this all plays out. Next, this past weekend, Twitter announced that users must pay for its subscription service Twitter Blue or lose access to text message-based 2-factor authentication, a popular security feature. A pop-up notification notified users that if they don't pay the monthly fee, they will be locked out of their account starting on March 19th until they remove the security feature. Twitter suggested users try alternative security options, such as authentication apps or security keys that offer additional security beyond just a password. Twitter has stated that its decision to limit the security feature to Twitter Blue subscribers is intended to reduce misuse by bad actors. However, this comes as just another one of Twitter's most recent initiatives to maximize earnings at the company through Twitter Blue, which provides users with access to a verification service previously only available to celebrities, journalists, and other well-known individuals. In other news, Ohio State University has received a donation of $110 million to establish a software innovation center that aims to make Ohio State, Columbus, and the Midwest the new high-tech hub. The donation comes from the Timashev Family Foundation and is the largest gift in the university's history. The Center for Software Innovation will bring together Ohio State's College of Engineering, College of Business, and other partners to offer endowed professorships, academic offerings, and industry experience for students. Additionally, the center will also catalyze technology investments and advancements across the region. Ohio State is hopeful and has stated that the new center is well positioned for success given the rapid pace of technological advancement and development. Next up, Joseph James O'Connor, a British citizen accused of taking part in cyber attacks, including the high-profile Twitter hack of public figures such as Joseph Biden, Barack Obama, and Bill Gates, is set to be extradited from Spain to the U.S. The National Court of Spain has agreed to O'Connor's extradition to the U.S., where he faces 14 charges, including illegal access to computer systems, internet fraud, money laundering, and extortion. O'Connor, who is accused of hacking around 130 Twitter accounts, was arrested in the coastal town of Estepona, Spain, in July 2021. This being said, the extradition order can still be appealed. On DevOps.com, we have an article that looks at how Logz.io has incorporated ChatGTP into its Open 360 observability platform. The extension will allow automated recommendation capabilities to reduce mean time to remediation, with the overall goal of using AI to solve DevOps problems. To learn more, go to DevOps.com. On Container Journal, we have an article that looks at how Tigera added a Calico runtime threat defense platform for securing Kubernetes. Tigera has stated that this edition will be able to monitor and analyze network and container behaviors for potential attacks without having IT teams write their own set of complicated rules to be maintained. To learn more, go to containerjournal.com. Finally, on Security Boulevard, we have an article that looks at the community's reaction to the recent ransomware attack in Oakland, California. Officials are being quiet about the details of the attack, but they have set about to create federal processes to help underfunded cities that run on older systems and limited resources. Some security experts give their opinions about the attack and what to do next. To learn more, go to securityboulevard.com. And that's today's Techstrong News Recap.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're all having a fabulous DevOps experience. We are talking today about moving beyond DevOps, and I'm going to talk about moving beyond DevOps to DevSecOps. It is a topic that we've all become sort of passionate about in the last year, and I'm going to kind of cover why and where we're going with it. All right. So as all of us know, software is kind of hard to recall. What we generally do if there's a bug is we push things forward, and we always kind of move forward across the pipeline. Sometimes we do a rollback, but generally things are pushed forward. And we don't think about software in the way we think about a jar of peanut butter. So for example, if there's a problem with a jar of peanut butter, pretty much the peanut butter manufacturer can tell you what region it's in and who it was sent to. But we can't do that with software. So what happens is IT teams cannot ensure that the software systems they're sending out to you or that you're sending out to your end users are safe for consumption. And a lot of this has to do with the low-level dependencies around open source or potentially even dependencies around inner source. The problem is that we as IT teams, we cannot easily know and control the ingredients that we're using in our software. So our pipelines are missing some really critical steps when it comes to really being able to understand what we're adding, what we're putting in our software, and a list of ingredients for that software. So is this a problem? Yeah, it kind of is. It's becoming a pretty much a massive global problem. I don't want to sound alarmist, but it's kind of true. We're facing a time that there is a lot of software being written, a lot of open source code being consumed, and the systems that we create are now overly complex. And to be quite honest, it's almost impossible to secure with today's pipelines. So who am I? I am Tracy Reagan. I am the CEO of Deploy Hub. I am the community director of an open source project called Ortelius, which I am going to talk about briefly at the end of this. I'm on the board of the OpenSSF, which is the Open Source Security Foundation. I'm also on the board of the CD Foundation's Technology Oversight Committee. I was a founding member of the Eclipse Foundation. I helped found the CD Foundation. I'm honored to be a host of Techstrong Women. I'm a DevOps Institute ambassador, and I have about 20 years of experience doing this. I love to chat. That is my LinkedIn address. If you want to ping me, I'm happy to chat with you about this topic or any other topic for that matter. So DevSecOps is a growing segment of our industry. It has gotten pretty big, actually, 23.16 billion by 2029. It is a growing segment of what we do. There are many different tools that are entering the market. Many of them fit in well within the DevOps pipeline. Some of you may be consuming some of these tools, but overall, we have work to do. And this DevSecOps market is going to continue to grow over the next decade. What's driving it? We all know the story. I think the Log4j story is one of the most compelling stories of 2022. I say that because it happened in the end of 2021, and many of us started addressing this problem in 2022. So if you don't know about the Log4j problem, there's a lot of articles out there on it. I highly recommend you take a look and read and understand what occurred. This is not necessarily a problem because the developer for Log4j did something nefarious, but a vulnerability was found in Log4j that allowed hackers to take control of the system where it was running. So basically allowed you to exit out and do whatever you wanted to in the system. Which is really bad. It was a very bad vulnerability. About 44% of enterprises were impacted by it. Now, if you think about that, that's a lot of enterprises. And between December 9th and December 21st, Symantec's intrusion detection system, they claimed they blocked more than 93 million Log4j related exploitations attempts on more than 270 unique machines. Now, that's just Symantec's software that they reported on. We can just imagine how many systems, once that vulnerability was found, how many systems were being hacked, and companies were scrambling to figure out where is Log4j running. This is the core problem. We, as DevOps professionals, cannot easily answer for our CISO. We can't say, hey, security officer, we know that Log4j is running in these particular applications that are installed in these particular environments. So we have some work to do on our pipelines. And this problem is a problem of the pipeline. It's not something that we can pass to somebody else. Now, there's been other security tools out there in the market. There's pen testing, there's, threat detection. There's lots of different kinds of security software. But what I'm talking about is the core of how we build our software, knowing what's in the software and how to respond to a threat. Part of our problem is the complexity of the software we're now creating. Tyler Jewell, I always quote him on these because the research he does is incredible. His insights are spot on, let's just to say the least. And he really makes you think about what's next in terms of software development, DevOps, and security. In his 2022 developer-led landscape, he's talked about this complexity that we're facing. And he says that software systems have become so complex that it's getting too difficult for humans to reason about the system. Now, if you've seen my talks before, you probably have seen me quote this, and I do so over and over because the more I tell you this, finally, you're going to start listening, I think. And the complexity he talks about spans even small teams. So he says even a small teams with 20 dependencies have a broader committer graph than a team of 10,000 engineers. That's a big statement. He also points out that securing the software supply chain has leaped to the top of the CIO and CDO's imperatives for 2022. Data officers have been always very concerned about the data that they're managing. But CIOs necessarily, I don't know if they've thought about it. Now that security problem is starting to really infiltrate the entire organization. CIOs have always been worried about the security of software, but oftentimes we get more focused on delivering features to end users. And that is what becomes the priority. So we discovered SBOMs this year. I have always talked about SBOMs. Sometimes people looked at me like I was green for talking about SBOMs. Some of you may know I have another company called OpenMake Software. And in 1995, we started a process of managing the compile and link process, which allowed for a build audit, meaning that every single thing that the compiler, linker, or any other resource compiler touched, we reported on. Because it was important. We want to know, not a bill of material oftentimes in the beginning was seen as a list of what was checked out to the build directory. It has since grown quite a bit since then. But even a list that's checked out to the build directory isn't an accurate list because your build script can reference files from other places other than the local build directory, and often does. So, for example, compiler libraries. There's maybe other things that get put out there that end up in your package. And that's what happened in some other famous breaches where a nefarious DLL got put into a package and we had another issue. So SBOMs are now becoming more and more important. Jim Zemlin, who's the executive director of the Linux Foundation, he says that SBOMs will play an essential role in building more trust and transparency in how software is created, distributed, and consumed throughout the supply chains. And I would like to just say throughout the DevOps process, because that's really where it has to be addressed. And this is not an easy problem to fix. We really have to put some time, energy, and focus into this problem. And we have to have a dialogue amongst all of us to sort out the best way to solve this problem. As I indicated, I'm on the Open Source Security Foundation, which is a foundation under the Linux Foundation and under the part of the guidance of Jim Zemlin, where we are working on a mobilization plan to identify areas where we as a community, the IT community, can start addressing this particular problem. I have a link here, Software Bill of Materials and Cybersecurity Readiness. I suggest that you Google that and you take a look at the research that the Linux Foundation did on SBOMs, SBOM usage, SBOM consumption, so you can begin understanding the challenge we have ahead of us. And yeah, this problem was so prevalent that it trickled all the way up to the White House, all the way up to the Oval Office. And President Biden did see this as a serious problem, serious enough to establish an executive order for improving the software supply chain. And really what it said was, hey, you know what, guys, if you're going to send software to the government, if you're a vendor of ours and you're writing software to us, you better know the ingredients. We want to know when a recall is is needed. We want to know when Log4j is bad, and we want to know where it runs so we can fix it as soon as possible. You can just imagine what the U.S. government went through when the Log4j hack was brought forward. I'm sure they scrambled and worked very hard, like we all did, to get that fixed. But the core problem was we didn't know where it was running. And that is a bad thing. We all get an F for that because we did not understand what we were consuming. And keep in mind, it's not just Log4j, it's the version of Log4j and the version of your application that's consuming it. So it goes beyond just knowing where one particular library or package is. So yeah, if you're now submitting software to the U.S. government, you're going to have to produce an application level SBOM for the software system that you're delivering, what we typically call an application. So that's what they're going to ask for. And I believe that started now in just this last month. They signed it in May, and I believe it went in force in September. So what is in an SBOM after all? How do you harden cybersecurity with a software bill of material report? So there's just three things we should think about. The most important one is a list of the software dependencies that the open source or the inner source consumes. What is it consuming? And of course, to get really down, you're going to have to go find what those dependencies are and what they're consuming. So this can traverse down a pretty deep tree or set of roots. It's kind of under the surface. That's why it's hard to find. Now, early on, SBOMs were used by companies like ours, DeployHub, that we provide software to enterprise companies, and they wanted to know if we were using any open source software that had a license that allowed them or did not allow them to consume it. So SBOMs licensing was a primary aspect of SBOMs early on. But they also show ownership, where it came from, its provenance, and any of the lower level dependencies, like I said. Now, with those lower level dependencies, you can start generating and deriving your vulnerabilities. That information allows you to pass something to a list of dependencies, for example, to a CVE database and get back what your vulnerabilities might be, and if there's anything in red that you might want to react to. But truly, it is becoming very, very complex. And I really do like to equate it to herding cats. Because if you ever tried to do this, if you ever looked at your dependencies, you realize how spread out they are. And just calling kitty, kitty, kitty doesn't always work very well. They may be chasing a mouse and deciding that they have no interest in listening to you. And that's kind of what dependencies do. They're just out there, just kind of replicating themselves and running around. And what we have to do in DevOps is to start documenting where they're at. Even if we can't control them, we can know them. So there are two primary SBOM standards. I'm not going to go deep into what SBOMs fully include and what the standards are. I pulled this article up from a company called SettleTop. I thought their article was really, really well written. It talked about some of the differences between SPDX and CycloneDX. SPDX is part of the Linux Foundation. Cyclone is part of a different open source. Cyclone has a lot of tools around it. SPDX has a lot of adoption, and I don't think it matters, to be quite honest. What matters is you start generating SBOMs. You start looking into this problem and start understanding how you add it to your DevOps pipeline. So while we have this really hard problem to solve in a monolith world, Cloud Native just made it harder. If you think about what we do when we generate an SBOM, generally SBOMs are generated at the time of the build. So if you're creating a monolithic application where you're compiling and linking all of your objects together as one binary or jar file or set of binaries, you can pretty much generate a application level SBOM with the tools that I referenced before. When you start doing microservices and you start decoupling your application, every time you create a container, your container build is going to include that step, which means that all the low-level pieces that make up your logical application have their own SBOM. So now we have to sort out how to create a logical application SBOM in a decoupled environment. I bring this up because while we have made some strides, I think, in monolith, and fixing the monolith will be challenging but doable, it becomes much harder when we have a decoupled architecture. And as many of you may know who have listened to me talk before, I'm a huge fan of microservices. I believe in reuse. In other words, maybe it would have been great if Log4j had been a microservice and running in one container in our clusters, and all we had to do is replace it there and not recompile hundreds of applications. That would have made a lot of sense, right? And I believe we'll get there. I believe that is where the industry is going in terms of building out these packages and creating reusable components that we all can consume. And maybe when we do that, we'll have more control over them. But getting there requires that we have to think about our DevOps pipeline with microservices moving across the pipeline all day long and impacting multiple applications. And every time that happens, a new SBOM for the application level is created or needs to be created. So this was sort of in this article, this document that was done, the software bill of materials, cybersecurity readiness. It says the most pressing issue was identified by 62% of the overall sample was the need for industry consensus on best practices to integrate the production and consumption of SBOMs into software development. The production and consumption of SBOMs occur in DevOps. However, it goes on to say there is not yet a consensus on where SBOM production or consumption should occur in DevOps. That is our challenge. There are three types of SBOMs that we need to think about in our pipeline. Source to artifact SBOMs, which is your source. Artifact to artifact SBOMs, which is your build, who's using the Log4j package, for example, and the deploy SBOM, what does the OS level dependencies look like that may impact runtime? So you potentially have SBOMs that are going to be at multiple stages of your pipeline. Challenges, so every build script needs to be updated to generate an SBOM. If you have hundreds of build scripts, you're going to have lots of work to do to add the generation of SBOMs. That means container builds and monolithic builds. This is my biggest complaint. Even if an SBOM is generated, it is not consumed and it's left underneath the build directory. So in case you need it someday, you can go look at it. But there's a lot of DevOps intelligence in that SBOM that we should be using. But there's no easy way to centralize the SBOM data to make it relevant. And maybe this is why we're having difficulty deciding what to do with SBOMs. Now, Tyler Jewell makes a suggestion on this. He says service governance will be the creation of service catalogs, metadata stores about how the software was created, and intelligence systems that inform stakeholders or insights for the system. So how do we pull the DevOps intelligence into a single place? And he talks about this thing called a service governance, which of course made us very happy because we've been working on that. And if you've been watching what the Ortelius project is doing, Ortelius is an open source project that's part of the Continuous Delivery Foundation. It's a unified component catalog, and it's designed to track the versions of your code along with all of the pieces. It's SBOMs, it's CVEs, it's key value pairs, any of the configuration data or the software composition data of that particular object. And we store it into one place. Now, in a decoupled environment, what we also can do is roll that data up to the logical application level so that you can generate a logical application SBOM or a logical application CVE. And now we're starting to think about how we can build on that data to do more predictive work. But we're really talking about a centralized catalog that takes all of the stuff that we're working on, SPDX or Cyclone, your CVEs, what's going on at SigStore, things by NIST, or you're scanning by JFrog, your deployment information that you get from Argo or Spinnaker or Helm, your commits that you're getting from Git, and pull that in to a central evidence store and rolling that information up to the highest level, that logical application. Things like provenance, your dependencies, your licensing, that's pushing forward and then giving you what your available ingredients are, what your impact is, your exposure, your application SBOM, and the ability to start working on zero trust policies because we're going to have the zero trust data. Now we put it in the pipeline, so we get the Ortelius gets triggered at any time a build is done, so we can pull that SBOM information. New container registry tells us there's a new container out there. A new container tells us that there's a new version of an application because something has changed, and then we pull the information back from the deployment to say where it's at. So, what the benefits to the pipeline, it changes your dev pipeline to a DevSecOps pipeline. It reduces costs because it provides a central location for everybody to consume these objects. It exposes the risk. Anybody can look at a dashboard and see what the SBOM looks like, what the CVEs are, and it restores some control because now, if you have a problem, it's easy to report on the vulnerabilities. And it's really easy to say, where is Log4j running? So a simple search of the database will be able to tell you precisely where Log4j is running, who's consuming it, and where it needs to be repaired. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what we're all really working on. There's a lot of other security pieces that go around this, but pulling it into a central database and being able to act on it is what Ortelius is doing. So thank you. I hope you all can get started on building out a DevSecOps pipeline. I would encourage you to take a look at the Ortelius open source project. Check out our GitHub, become a contributor, call me, reach out, we can chat. And if you have ideas about what Ortelius could also be gathering, we're so happy to hear any input from the community, because like I said, it's time now that we all get together and start talking about what the DevOps intelligence looks like and how we can be part of the security answer, not the problem. Thank you so much. And I hope you have a great, great experience at DevOps Experience.
Welcome everyone to my presentation on the IoT landscape, and I think there's no more fitting place to be talking about DevOps and IoT than right from an airport. You can see a plane out there, which is parked outside the gate, and this is the ultimate convergence of in-person and virtual conferences. So I was just giving a presentation here in Atlanta, flying back, and this is giving us the mix of our hybrid and virtual worlds converging together. So what I'm going to talk about today is all of the IoT devices which are taking over our entire landscape. According to Gartner and Statista, by the year 2030, we're going to have more than 30 billion IoT devices which are impacting our life, which are everywhere. You probably already have some IoT devices which you're using, which you are taking advantage of, which you're possibly even developing or deploying software updates to. And I think that as a consumer, it's great that we have all of these different IoT devices at our convenience, but also that we're able to push software updates and that people have come to realize that they need the latest software always deployed and always active on their devices. And when we think about software updates, this is kind of the thought process that most end users think about when a new update's available. So first they decide, do they want it? Do they want to actually do this update? Then they make a decision if it's risky or not, if they trust it, if they can verify it. Doing it verifications is very costly, and this process is really slowing down our ability to do quick software updates, because as consumers, we want the latest features, but the last thing you want is to have your device inoperable or to have it reboot and take a long time to do an update. And this is causing the bottleneck of human intervention, where us being in the middle, us being gatekeepers of updating devices, of pushing new software updates to our IoT stack, is slowing down the ability for companies and for developers and software teams to continuously update devices. So the way of solving this problem is having a robust continuous integration pipeline, where you have different stages where you are making sure that you're pushing things through an integration testing, system testing, staging, production. You have quality gates at each of these different areas to make sure that the right tests, the right verifications, the right acceptance testing is performed. And this means that for the end user, when they actually get an update pushed to them, then they don't have to worry about whether it's risky or if they trust it. They can short circuit this whole process and immediately update to the latest version of the application. And if you look at um, common applications which you use, like do you know what version of, for example, the LinkedIn app or the Twitter app, or do you know what version of websites that you're using? And usually the answer is no, because we're moving to a cloud-based SaaS model. People are expecting software to be updated all the time. And this extends beyond just applications to IoT devices. So we expect our mobile phones, we expect our cars, we expect our industrial appliances to also constantly be updating and also constantly getting security fixes and patches, which make them better devices. So speaking of industrial applications, let's stop for a sec to talk about and to think about the next generation of IoT, which is industrial Internet of Things. And when you look at all of the different devices in manufacturing, in power plants, and a bunch of different industrial applications, they're seeing the advantage of having a modern IoT architecture and the robustness, the flexibility, and the efficiency that they get from using IoT devices. They're getting power savings and efficiency from having better solutions and better technology, getting better communication between devices where they can use both wired, wireless networks, or even 5G and edge networks to deploy. Meeting safety standards by having better standardization and certification requirements, which they can enforce with IoT devices. Getting better security as well. So having better cybersecurity and security. And we'll talk a lot about security and how this falls into both IoT and IIoT. And then predictive maintenance, figuring out when things are going to fail and then being able to update devices before they fail and making sure they have the highest amount of runtime. And when you look at the how they're architecting the networks to support these sort of implementations, there's a bunch of different components which they're using to support all of this. So they have industrial control systems, supervisory control and data acquisition units, human machine interfaces, distributed control systems, programmable automotive controllers, programmable logic controllers, intelligent electronic devices, sensors, and remote thermal units, and a whole bunch of other sensors coming from a variety of different manufacturers, all of which need to be interconnected, secured, and upgraded. And when you look at the network topology of how you bring all of these disparate systems together, you need a large network converges together your wired internet, your wireless internet, and makes a secure connection between all of these different devices. So that spans all the way from your enterprise network, which has all of your servers, your DMZ, gives you connectivity to services which supply email, identity management, call management, etc., down to your plant servers, which would typically be behind an industrial DMZ, and those would be all of your VPN portals, your remote gateway servers, your application mirrors, and different devices you need to have on device at the edge. Then site operations, which allow you to control your factory, do networking and storage arrays, all the switches and distribution which you need to supply your total communication network for the device. And then different zones for sensors, for controllers, and for supervising different devices, which support a variety of different interconnections based on the device, whether it needs a direct switch or it needs a wireless connection, or maybe it's a 5G device. and kind of converging all of these different devices into a network which is secure and can support different use cases, like we talked about, for different industrial uses. So when you bring all of this together in this huge converged network, um, what happens is you end up with a lot of devices coming from a relatively small number of vendors. Um, so these are the top 10 vendors which are supplying some of the critical devices to IoT companies. And the being able to secure these devices, being able to update these devices is critical to maintaining secure infrastructure. And when you look at IoT as a general area, um, it used to be that oil spills were the most critical thing which stopped our industry, and now security vulnerabilities are becoming the new oil spills. Because when you have a critical outage in a power plant in an industrial setting, that can affect and that can take down critical infrastructure and resources, which the entire population depends upon. So here are some examples of ICS cyber attacks which happened since 2010, and the number and the severity of different attacks has just been increasing year over year. Um, there are a bunch of different nation states which have been targeting critical infrastructure of companies like dams and power grids. There's also a bunch of general exploits which affect devices across the board, like the Windows 7 EOL update and a whole bunch of other security updates of older systems, which expose them to ransomware, expose them to different attacks. And these are critical systems which everyone depends upon. And when you hit a situation where a targeted attacker can take down a power plant or a nuclear power plant or an energy system or a dam. This is critical infrastructure which is being affected, which is affecting us globally. And I think that just recently, this has been the news today. So the Russians have continued their aggression towards Ukraine, and they've been specifically targeting their power grid with missiles and physical attacks, which is really unfortunate. Um, but this is something which has been going on for a really long time. And let's talk for a bit about the 2015 Ukraine power grid attack, where it wasn't a physical attack with missiles, it was instead a cyber attack where they got into the power grid and they took down some critical infrastructure. And basically, the way which they executed this attack, it was traced back to a hacking organization in Russia. Is they got in via phishing emails and attacks on people's behavior. Once they got into the network, then they were able to spread out and get credentials. So inside the VPN, they were able to steal different credentials for critical servers, find the network hosts and do discovery, deploy build malicious software and then deploy it into different systems. They ended up getting into the UPSs, doing firmware updates, uploading malware to a bunch of servers in order to kill it, and then eventually causing a large power outage in Ukraine. And all of this is done without a physical attack. It's a completely cyber attack on critical infrastructure, and it shows the danger to not having well secured systems where the right people management of tokens and credentials are in place, the right server management of the network and security of systems, and also making sure that you don't have 0 days or exploits which hackers can use to then compromise and get into critical infrastructure. Another example of a similar sort of cyber attack was on the Saudi Arabian petrochemical. They penetrated the IoT network, got into an engineering workstation. Using social engineering, were able to download some critical files, which they modified and put exploits in. And then the exploits gave them full access and control of devices and controllers, which allowed them to shut down the chemical plant. So again, these sort of combination of cyber attacks and social engineering attacks allow dedicated attackers to get into critical infrastructure and cause quite a lot of damage. So in in thinking about how we mitigate these sort of challenges in our industry, really the biggest change which has happened recently is the DevOps team, the DevOps developer, has become the center of the security organization. And the reason for this is all of the deployments, all the updates, all of the software device controls pass through you as the DevOps team, where you're um, have all the software releases, you have all the dependencies of different open source libraries, and you can control what goes out. And when you think about your role in DevOps, really you're all of these roles put together. So you're enabling developers, you're facilitating deployment devices. You have all of the binaries, all of the deployment artifacts, so you're a single source of truth. You're becoming a security expert because we all have to with new security exploits and software updates. Whenever there's a production issue or a patch or a release, that affects the entire organization, and particularly DevOps team, and you're helping to remediate and fix security vulnerabilities. So I think that coming to the DevOps Experience Conference and learning about IoT is a critical part of how we secure the software supply chain. And when you look at the the types of software supply chain attacks which are happening, there's really two categories of different exploits which are happening. So one is attackers which are exploiting existing issues, and those are some of the attacks we talked about in the industrial Internet of Things. You're taking CVs or 0 days, they're finding secrets and configuration issues, and they're using these as ways of getting into systems and exploiting them. But perhaps the more dangerous sort of attack is when attackers are now injecting malicious code via public and private repos, or they're getting in via IDEs and CI/CD systems to actually inject malicious code, which they can then use. And the Saudi Arabia attack leveraged some of these techniques in order to break into their into the petrochemical plant. And I think what really brought this home for all of us was the recent attack of SolarWinds, where they broke into a system in the supply chain, um, got into the CI/CD server, modified the binaries before they were signed, and they used this as a way to then attack downstream organizations. And these sort of supply chain attacks are increasing in frequency. They're becoming a new critical piece of infrastructure which needs to be secured. And it's affecting the whole industry, just like the recent Log4Shell incidents, where we were all patching systems last January when this came out, because there were so many critical systems, so many affected systems that we had to update. And this is just really the tip of the iceberg for what we need to do to secure the entire software space, but in particular IoT devices and the IoT ecosystem. And all of the software we build is constructed from open source software. Over 85% of software which is contained in a typical enterprise application is composed of open source. And the open source software comes from one or more of these systems. You're downloading software and trusting NPM, you're getting things from PyPy, you're getting things from Ruby Gems or Maven Central, etc. And one way of thinking about any of these systems is when you are pulling code from a external repo, it's the same thing as plugging in a USB stick off of the pavement. So you're exposing your critical software systems to a relatively untrusted resource. And Alex Birsan did a great attack leveraging NPM as a supply chain attack to get into enterprise systems. And the mechanism for doing this is called the dependency confusion attack, was taking advantage of the fact that vulnerable package managers, instead of going out and pulling the library from the internal repository, they'll also go out and they'll check, for example, npm, pypy, and external repositories to see if there's a newer version. Um, and if you are pulling the dependency from an external source and going around your internal repository, this is giving an attacker the potential of publishing a malicious library, which gets pulled into your system as a seemingly updated version of an internal library. Another problem with this also is when you make requests out to npm, it's in the clear text for what libraries you're requesting, so an attacker doesn't even need to know what your internal libraries are, because they can just sniff the network traffic and figure out exactly which internal libraries you have based upon the requests being requested off npm where there's no version available. So this is, again, like a huge security issue for companies. It's something which you need to patch or be aware of so that you're not pulling in vulnerable libraries. One way of doing this is putting a package manager which understands the difference between external repositories, internal repositories, and shields you from pulling in libraries from public repositories where it's clearly an internal corporate library. And if you don't do this, then you can be attacked. Alex Pearson made a total of $130,000 off their dependency confusion attack, simply by doing bug bounties on different companies. So fortunately, he wasn't using it for malicious purposes. He was just using it as a way of collecting bounties on companies. But he did catch Apple, Facebook, and a whole bunch of other companies with vulnerable systems to this particular exploit, which he proved, and he was able to collect legitimate bug bounties off of them simultaneously. So it's perhaps one of the bigger bug bounties which has happened recently. And another example of a vulnerable package manager is, or vulnerable central library, is what happens with the Azure libraries. So the JFrog security team found instances where the Azure libraries were being targeted for typo squatting, and um, uh, if you left the namespace off. So, for example, the Azure core tracing package, they uploaded the exact same package without the Azure prefix. And if you left off the prefix, then you would pull down the malicious library instead of pulling down the legitimate library. So again, this is a attack on, in this case, everyone using Microsoft Azure as a cloud service, depending upon developers to mistype or to shorten things, which often your IDE or you just do out of convenience. And there were 218 packages affected at Azure Test, at Azure Tools, at Catalang, and they were very clever in how they did this because they published with different user IDs, so that you couldn't tell that these were related. And they had also created scripts to automatically generate and do the to quickly create all these different user IDs, package them. Now, our security team reported this. They were all taken down. And it seemingly, they didn't get a chance to actually use this for any malicious use. But you have to be aware that these sort of attacks are happening, and they're very prevalent. So one project which we launched recently at JFrog to address the security, open source supply chain security, is called Persia. It's now a continuous delivery foundation, CD Foundation project. It's vendor neutral and it's entirely open source. And the goal is to make it easy and seamless for software developers to securely publish their libraries without being victims of typo squatting, of someone maliciously changing the library, a la SolarWinds, or somebody who is trying to subvert the open source supply chain. Now, the project has Greek origins, like any good cloud native project needs, and Persia comes from, it was actually an ancient Greek system for communicating over mountaintops. They would use 10 torches and two arrays of 5. kind of use this on the Greek alphabet to then communicate letters over long distances. And we want to accomplish the same thing for open source software to reliably and securely publish libraries across the entire open source ecosystem and make this a secure, reliable, and open source way of receiving libraries and dependencies from open source developers. And we think that this is a critical link that's missing today and a critical piece of infrastructure that will help to improve the software supply chain. Now, there's three parts to how this technology works. The first part is having a secure and reliable distribution infrastructure. So we have a peer-to-peer based network. The backbone of this is the authoritative package registries, which are run by the different companies which are supporting Persia. Then there's clients that you can install on your CI/CD server on your developer machines, which let you pull packages from Persia from the secure network. It's a drop-in replacement for your typical CI/CD or for your typical central repositories, and it gives you a more secure mechanism for getting exactly the same code. The second part is doing verification of builds. So we do multi-node verification of builds across the authoritative nodes where you're not relying upon one company's or one individual's builds. You're getting it built on multiple different corporate servers simultaneously, and then they're being verified against each other. And if the verification fails, the package doesn't get published to the network. If the verification succeeds on all the servers over the verification, then it will publish it to the network. And what this does is this makes sure that if somebody wanted to attack the network and pass off a malicious library or try to inject something into the network, it would require them to simultaneously subvert all of the different servers which are doing the build verification, which makes it a much harder attack surface than getting into a single corporate network. And if you remember from the IIoT attacks, there are a lot of social attacks which can be used to get access to corporate networks, to critical infrastructure. So relying on builds, even from large companies like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, or others, you basically have a single point of failure if a dedicated attacker can get access to their internal network. And the final aspect of this is the immutable transparency ledger. So this is the backbone of the network. This is how you verify the libraries you're getting. It publishes all the information about the published artifacts, who's verified them, who's signed them, and can be used to create software bill of materials down the line so that you can do the full attestation and provenance of where your artifacts came from. So we announced Persia joining the Continuous Delivery Foundation. The companies which are currently involved in it are JFrog, Docker, Deploy Hub, Huawei, Featureway, and Oracle, who are all supporting this project. We're also open and looking for new folks to join the project, join the network, and help us to secure the open source supply chain. And we think there's a huge opportunity here to make the entire open source ecosystem a better place. Okay, with that, I want to thank everybody for joining this presentation about hacking and securing the Internet of Things. And what we're going to have next is we're going to have a panel with some of the different experts who really understand the security space and have some great practical knowledge about what's happening in the ecosystem. And one of the folks who's joining us, Amit Serper, he actually discovered the NotPetya exploit, which is one of the IIoT exploits, which I had earlier on one of my slides. And it's exciting to see and hear from some of the researchers and the folks who are actually working on this day-to-day. I'll also be joining the panel. So thanks everyone for joining this presentation. And in a couple minutes, you'll be flipped over and you'll be able to see the Internet of Things panel, which we're going to put on. So thank you.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV.
I'm Bonnie Schneider for Techstrong TV, and I'm joined today by Alex Rappaport, the award-winning CEO and co-founder of Zwitterco, an innovative wastewater reprocessing startup. With a background in sustainability, Alex is on a mission to tackle the global water crisis by revolutionizing the treatment and reuse of the world's toughest industrial and agricultural wastewaters. Alex, that sounds like quite an endeavor. Thanks so much for joining us today on Techstrong.
Absolutely. Bonnie, great to be here. Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, I'd love to hear about your background and how you chose this area to really dive into for Zwitterco.
Sure. If I rewind the clock, I actually started out as a river raft guide. So I used to teach whitewater stand-up paddleboarding, kayaking, rafting on the Potomac River just outside of DC. So as I was first trying to figure out where my professional career was going to go, those memories and those moments spending so much time outdoors was why I ended up pursuing environmental engineering. It's why I wanted to see technology deployed to helping sustainable challenges. And when I was in college at Tufts, I had the great fortune of getting connected with the research that had developed the initial technology that Zwitterco has been founded on. And we've been building the commercialization story ever since. And in the last 5 years have been an opportunity to see these products really come to life in the hands of our customers, treating all sorts of wastewater streams that the world had previously said weren't filterable and wouldn't be eligible for reuse in the way that we're now seeing our customers able to better manage their water.
How big of a problem is wastewater? It's not something that, we think about every day, but it's all around us.
So something like 1/6 of the world's freshwater drawdown ends up as industrial or agricultural wastewater, hundreds of billions of gallons a day of water that is used for cooling, for cleaning, to create the processes that we end up with manufactured goods and services. It is hard to see it, but oftentimes the things that make our food take up 5 to 10 times more water than the food product itself. The way that our fuel comes around ends up producing immense volumes of industrial wastewater. And so often water has been a commodity that has not been too expensive or sort of too challenging to discharge of out of sight, out of mind. But as we see water scarcity, we see rising costs, and we see companies and groups that are really working to better manage their water footprint and achieve sustainability goals, there's been a big shift in the thinking about the investments required to better enhance treatment infrastructure and to start making those adaptations to being able to manage sort of as much of the water as you need on site at these facilities rather than constantly competing for limited or dwindling public supply resources.
One of the factors also I'm thinking about I have a background in meteorology, and we're seeing with climate change more sustained droughts that are happening longer, more frequently, longer lasting. And of course, climate change in general just happening at a faster rate than maybe most people realize. So how have these prolonged droughts affect your mission and what you're doing, and maybe add more urgency to the work you're doing?
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen everything from the 40% reduction in water available for irrigation and agriculture in the California Central Valley. We've heard about all of the impending water cutbacks that are likely to happen around the Colorado River Basin. So no longer are these day zero events or challenging sort of questions. How are we going to allocate water for public health and for urban usage as well as for industry and agriculture? These are no longer faraway problems. We're experiencing this every day. So the way that Zwitterco tries to help address these issues is we're providing tools that give the companies that need to have their own access to hundreds of thousands or millions of gallons a day of water to run their operations. We want to give them tools so they can reuse as much of that on site and basically take them off the water grid or as far off the water grid as possible, so that as we see compression of available resources, I, as a meat and poultry facility, a dairy plant, a beverage bottling facility, I know that I have an independent, resilient supply of my own water. And no matter how the geography or the climate patterns shift, I at least have my future secured. We're seeing everything from companies that had built their facilities in locations where 30 years ago, there was no discussion about water stress, but they've watched their cost for utilities go up 8% year over year for the last couple decades. And now the cost of doing business is much more strenuous. We've seen other companies where they just can't access enough water. They've been drilling groundwater wells and they are maxing out what they have available capacity for. And as they've tried to drill more wells, access to more municipal water, the water's just not there. So as you start getting into, well, what do I do if I can't access my water? The challenges become very acute very quickly. You're hauling water in at exorbitant costs, or you're just limiting the amount of growth and production that you can provide. So it is something that people are really paying an acute level of attention to, as we've seen even the last couple of years, dramatic shifts in water availability.
That's a good point. And I want to kind of hone into this technology. It has a unique name that you're doing. How does it work and what is unique about it? It's a membrane technology. Can you explain that?
Yeah, it is a membrane. So our membrane is made from a sort of a breakthrough material, zwitterionic copolymers, which is where we get our company's namesake from. And what this material is, when you think of a filter, imagine a coffee filter, semi-permeable barrier that is removing some contaminants out of a fluid stream and letting other things pass through based on the size of the pores. Most filters, most membranes are really good at removing salts or other species out of water. We see membranes used a lot in seawater desalination and municipal water treatment, but they really struggle to take out organic contaminants, things like fats, oils, proteins that often show up as byproducts in industrial manufacturing processes. So because filters are so quickly clogged, if you've got fat or oil in your water, you're going to really struggle to get an economic use of that kind of technology. What our chemistry, our material is effectively a non-stick filter. You can take oil and grease loading that is representative of a lot of industrial fluids, and you can clean the membrane easily. Simple water rinse will fully regenerate its performance, and you can continue using that same filter cycle after cycle for years in environments that would have otherwise ruined a standard filter in hours or days. And this all comes from effectively this chemistry. The zwitterionic copolymers are so hydrophilic. They really love to attract and hold on to water molecules that when they are filtering a slurry of challenging contaminants, they never have those contaminants stick to the surface or get stuck inside the pores, because they just love to hold on to those water molecules and stay hydrated, stay clean from that adsorption of tough to treat contaminants. So when we rinse them off, you're basically removing or dislodging any surface aggregated material, and you're uncovering a virgin membrane underneath.
Well explained, Alex. I would never have understood that. And I like the coffee filter analogy that kind of sets us up in your mind when you're visualizing it. But what are the developmental challenges that you face? This is a very innovative technology. I'm sure it wasn't smooth sailing all along the way. Can you describe some of the challenges that you faced and how you found solutions for them?
Sure. When you're really in those early stages and you have evidence at lab performance of a technology that has breakthrough performance, that doesn't mean necessarily that it was designed to be manufactured at commercial scale. And thinking about the difference between hand-created prototypes versus material where you're making it by the mile, which is the volume that you need to actually treat meaningful volumes of wastewater. What we needed to figure out early on was either how are we going to find all of the money, the funding to invest in the equipment and facilities to have full manufacturing ourselves, which is a pretty tough proposition when you're asking investors and high-risk capital providers to say, we need multiple millions to build a thing that hasn't ever existed before. Or you're looking to potentially partner with larger companies where you don't necessarily have the same incentive structures. We existentially need to make our products in order to see the business grow, but larger manufacturing companies just don't have that same agenda necessarily. And it's difficult for a small company to get into those kinds of mature relationships. So one of the things that we were able to do that is unique to our industry is that we were able to silo or segment each of the different things that needed to be manufactured: the polymers, the membrane, the assembled elements, and how we do quality control. And we designed very specifically the way that we synthesize and the way that we produce our materials so that it could adapt to contract manufacturing, that we could have outsourced partners that were sort of on a toll or on a fee for service basis, able to do each of the stages of production, so that we weren't investing in our own equipment, but we weren't signing up for a partnership we weren't prepared for. And those unlocking some of those development hurdles meant that we went from lab scale prototypes to doing all commercial testing on industrially relevant manufacturing methods in the span of only a couple months after the company was founded. And that was a big opportunity for us to demonstrate the sort of scalability of the product, even as we were in our sort of high risk, what is this technology and how does it work stage when speaking with investors.
That's interesting. Our audience on Techstrong TV, a lot of them are working in the IT industry, in software. Can you kind of dive into the technology that was needed, that you leaned into when you were developing this company, in terms of the technical support that you were able to acquire through your team?
Sure. So I was very lucky when I first founded the company that I got connected to my two co-founders. One of them had been in industry for about a decade, working at various advanced materials and membrane companies. Another was a field engineer who had been servicing water and wastewater treatment in all sorts of tough industrial applications. And so the two of them, Chris Drover and Chris Roy, helped bring for us a very early lens of how you think about that R&D, prototyping, scale up, design for manufacturing, sort of breadth of skill sets, and that we also had a way to think about what's the value proposition of this technology? How do we design equipment or test profiles that allow us to work with customers and partners on those early evidence or trial bases? And so very quickly on, we had a broader skill set in the founding team that knew how to both attack some of those commercial scale up and manufacturing scale up challenges. Is that sort of the direction that you were looking to head there?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, because I think that a lot of the titles of the people that helped you there are watching, people are in similar roles. So it's interesting to see how that can come into play, especially for a company that has a sustainable mission. And that's sort of where I wanted to kind of wrap it up today, of what this means to you. And you mentioned your background, you'd done rafting and you had some personal experience on the water, but now that you're well into Zwitterco and you're seeing the impact that it's having, what is the connection to the sustainable movement that triggers that's most important to you?
Absolutely. We have a broad moonshot at the company, which is to recover half of the world's industrial and agricultural wastewater. If it's in a centralized facility, if it comes out of a pipe, we want to be there with the fleet of tools needed to treat and make eligible for reuse those wastewaters. And to me, what that moonshot means is this almost near impossible mission, where if we're headed in that direction, we know that we're trying to have the impact to make the good use of the technology that we have to support these sustainable ideals. And that future, what that vision would look like, is a world where water is not the constraint to all of this sort of public health, decarbonization, resource recovery challenges that we see showing up in so many industries, right? If we can help industry have their own reliable, resilient source of water, then we don't have to have that competition over private and public supply. If we can see the industries that are supporting renewable natural gas, green chemicals, plant-based proteins, not have water be the thing that holds them back from their growth, then these other industries that are tackling climate change and decarbonization in their own right have the most efficient way to scale those businesses up. And then as the final point, there's so much that we have in our wastewater that has value. And when we dump it down the drain, it ends up being a contaminant or an environmental pollutant we have to deal with. But if we can extract those materials in a way where we recover their value, you create new product streams, new revenue streams that help industries look at, I have a waste, now it's a fertilizer. I have a waste, now it's a feedstock. And that helps that transition to advanced treatment, because now you're looking at new drivers to the bottom line. And that trifecta to me of the resilience, the sustainability in other industries, and the resource recovery all speaks to how water is just this underpinning resource underneath all of these different industries.
Thank you so much for linking all of those together in a way. I don't think that most people put that into perspective, how water really connects all of the areas of sustainability and making the most of our resources. And I really appreciate your time today. Alex Rappaport, award-winning CEO and co-founder of Zwitterco, an innovative wastewater reprocessing startup. Thank you so much, and we wish you the best of luck as you continue to grow.
Thank you, Bonnie. It's great to be here.
All right, thanks. Stay with us on Techstrong TV. We'll be right back.
is Techstrong TV.
Well, so let's do this, because I actually think there's two books in this. There's the novel, there's the story, and though it's a much less in terms of page count, there is an excellent reference in the back of the book. I think it's where you had the chance to say, if you didn't get it from the story, or if we weren't able to wrap it into the story, there's some extremely valuable information. If you wanted to, like, read the novel and read ahead to the answers in the back of the book in Appendix 1, it talks about MRAs and MRIAs, talks about pipeline design with controls and toll gates, talks about DevSecOps, talks about what things are in the book, what things aren't, talks about shift left, and these are, a couple pages, a couple pages, software decomposition analysis, etc. So why did you put that? Why did you add that to the book?
Those are all important concepts. Like at one point in time, we had to stop writing the book and go to market. And so as we had this stuff, like we'll call it the cutting room floor, but it wasn't stuff we didn't want to throw away. It's very important. And like, let's talk about shift left. Let's talk about DevSecOps. A lot of people use these terms, and I'll just say it out loud. A lot of people don't use them properly. And then what's the proper way to use it?
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, because I'd done a paper with a company called, a group called ONOG, the Open Network User Group. They were very responsible for a lot of work in SDN, SD-WAN, and they had asked me after we'd done the 2019 DevSecOps reference architecture, could I help them work on a paper for cloud? Now, it went a little different. It was about SIM and SOAR and all that. But one of the things I thought was really, really important in the beginning of that book was we were going to be referencing like network terms, and that you really like the thing about like all the terminology in our industry, we're terrible at overloading these terms.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think, one of the things I thought about was, as we were doing this, like if we're going to use a word, even like DevSecOps, then we're going to, goal of educating you, but more importantly, this is what we mean in this book when we're referencing to DevSecOps. So if you have a different opinion, doesn't matter. When we were using this context, it was that. So a lot of that was sort of say, we're going to use some terms, and then we did that early on, but then it got moved to the back. But it was really sort of a goal of like this is our definition of this term, and so when you see it used, whether you agree or not, you'll at least comprehend what we were saying. So
excellent. Well, the only thing that I found, I don't want to say lacking or missing, the only thing I found in the book I was hoping to see was maybe that pipeline done in a Tolkien style map, something really cool.
Yeah, where were you when we were writing this? Darn, man.
That would have been cool.
Man.
You can do that in the graphic novel version of it, right?
Go.
I mean, the Goal's got its own graphic novel version of it. Well, there's some very cool stuff in the back, and again, it's only a page, two on each topic. It's kind of a reference, but a good place to go if you're like, I'm not quite sure I know what control gates are in a DevOps pipeline design. Okay, great. I get it. And then you're reading the book, you're like, okay, because there were a few times when I realized that was back there, I went back and read it and like, okay, now I know like that's what you're meaning the term.
We wanted to make sure that we didn't want you to go Google the phrase and then like, whoa, some guy who's talking about DevSecOps is, some ridiculous explanation. And then you're like, you need to understand what we thought it was.
Very cool. Well, we're going to talk about your new venture.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure folks know about Investment Unlimited. Where do you recommend that they go get this? What's some of the best sources?
I think just Amazon. Yeah, I mean, it seems to be the or if you're at a DevSecOps or DevOps thing, me and Bill will be doing a lot of book signing this year.
Yeah,
because we went to work for a company. Turns out we both in parallel at the same time. We knew each other. And we were both leaving Red Hat, and we didn't actually know that each other were leaving Red Hat, and found out we were both talking to this startup because it's like mine, we think alike, right? We saw what these guys were doing. This company out of Oslo called Hosley. They had built a big piece of that story. And so Bill was in Europe, reached out to him. I met him at a conference, and we didn't even know we were talking to him. And then turns out we both got hired almost about the same time. And so it is, the short version of it is, it was a company that was doing quite a bit of what is described in that book already. Mm-hmm. They about over 3 million in funding, at 5 or 6 real customers in Europe, real banks running it. And, to my unbelievable delight, when Bill came in, he was able to take a bunch of the projects that he's been working on. And I'll do this pitch. If you want to see an unbelievable demo, reach out to me and Bill. Sorry, Mitch, going to do this because Bill has built me this incredible demo that it's mind blowing on how if you buy into the narrative of the book, and if you don't, God bless you. But if you do, and you want to see an implementation of it, I'm as passionate about this as I've been in almost anything in my whole background. That we have this story in a problem that has to be cleaned up and solved. So
yeah. No, thanks for the words of confidence. Yeah, that's some big words of confidence from a big person. So some of the stuff we built, it was some upstream open source from a previous life, and so we're bringing it in. And at the end of the day, with Cosley and what we're trying to do is, there's every time we're talking to somebody in various throughout the world, they're trying to do some version if they've read the book or not. The number one feedback I've got about the book, at least from customers and people I've talked to, and this has been as high as C-suite in some big companies, and as and it is, let's just say it's low on the totem pole as the person that the single DevOps engineer, is it gives everybody something to talk about. It's a common story people can navigate around, and then actually start to understand a bit of the architecture and some implementation details around this. And I think that's where, John and I right now with Cosley, being able to actually bring it in. In the enterprise, the enterprise doesn't want to they want to build software for their customers and, of course, make money that way. Some of this other supporting software, like a system such as Investments Unlimited talks about, those are things that, expert vendors, have an opportunity to provide those values. And so I think it's been fun being able to, John and I just call it getting the band back together.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff, man.
Say the company name again, just so folks get it in the
KOSLI.com, Cosley.com. It actually has some obscure Norwegian reference to, I don't know. It actually is sort of an offshoot of a real word, but it's one of those ones where if all of us have started companies, the hardest thing in a company is not the product, not the IP. It's getting a name that you can actually get the domain and trademark.
You can get all the variations of it.
Finding a 4-character name. That they actually found was probably the biggest success story so far.
So I have a question. There's the demo in the book, right? Really it because it talks about real stuff. So did the demo in the book inspire the product, and you kind of build it that way, or is this building the product and this demo in the book is describing?
No, what's interesting is one of the team and one of the authors was on the 2019 paper. And he left that paper and he built an internal system like this, right? And so I've been working with them over the years. I introduced them to Bill, and the thing was that these guys have been these two founders over the Cosley founders had come up with this idea on their own because they saw this problem with some banks in Europe that they'd been working with, and so as they tell it. They're literally, just getting their funding. They're sort of got a couple of customers, and now they're trying to figure out how are they going to get in the U.S. market. And they see this book show up, and they're like, "Oh my goodness,
we're doing this!"
And then, what got better for them? I'm at DevOps Days DC, and they're there, and I start talking to them, and oh my goodness, one of the guys who wrote the book might want to come to work for us. Meanwhile, he's over in Europe. And he pings them, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is ridiculous." We had no idea. I mean, I don't say no idea, but they knew it was going to be difficult for a sort of a Norwegian company to break glass in the U.S. They see this book and they're like, "Oh my goodness, where'd that come from?" And then they serendipitously run into two of the authors of the book, and I happen to think pretty pretty good pipe hitting guys to solve the problem as well. But yeah, no, they'll sit. They tell that story a lot about how like they couldn't believe their luck, So
maybe instead of find the company name, the domains, and the T-shirt, it's now the book. You got to write the book, right? Well, guys, this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah,
and frankly, an honor to talk with you both about it. I hold you both in very high regard, and appreciate our friendship too. And Bill, more recently meeting you, and John, who I know for a little while now. So, Investments Unlimited. Check it out, please. It's 140 some pages. It's a quick read. You can do a little book club at work if you want to go through it together. Just
read it on an airplane
Phoenix
flight
project. And then, of course, Costly, COSLI.com.
Yeah.
You find out the product. The product.
It's a KOL.
KOSLI Cosly.
Oh, you have it on. I didn't see that. We didn't pan the camera down.
I had the camera down. But
great. Well, wonderful. I appreciate you both being here, and it's been a lot of fun. So good luck with the venture, and thanks for the book too.
Thank you, sir. All right.
You bet.
Hi, everybody. Mike Rothman here, General Manager of Techstrong Research. Welcome to another episode of Techstrong Research Review. I'm here joined, as always, by my partner in crime, Mitch Ashley. Mitch, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. Mitch Ashley, both CTO with Techstrong Group and also principal, working with Mike on Techstrong Research. Great. It's great to have you back in the States, my friend.
I am, and surprisingly enough, after spending 10 days in Asia, I'm not that jet lagged. I was able to stay up until, maybe 11:30 last night. I slept through. For the most part, I don't get, if I get 5 hours of sleep a night, that's a lot for me. So I was, kind of up and around, 4:30, 5 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of hung out in bed until 6, 7.
You haven't seen sort of like out of pocket or wiped out.
No, and that's the thing, and that's kind of the strange thing. And obviously, I do a lot of international travel, always have. But really, it's kind of just when you take a step back, it kind of blows your mind that kind of in the half 2-3 hours a day where it overlaps between when you can talk to, folks in the States and when you can, do stuff in Asia. I pick up my phone, right? It cost me $30, I think, for the international data plan, from T-Mobile. I pick up my phone and I video with my parents or my kids from literally around the world, on the other side of the world. They look like they're, again, right next to me. We're chatting it up and, I'm showing them pictures of, these exotic places. And it really is just a totally different, perspective. I remember going to Australia back in the, kind of early or mid 90s at that point. I was out of pocket, right? I had my MCI card and I was trying to find a payphone so I could check in with my mom, right? Say, hey, yeah, we're okay. We're kind of tooling around from that standpoint. Now, again, I'm able to kind of FaceTime with my stepfather on his 94th birthday that he had when we were away. And again, it really is just kind of incredible in terms of how, kind of this collaboration stuff works and how the world, although is huge, right? I was on a plane for 18 hours, right? The longest flight, in the world. We did back and forth. But right, it's small in that, again, as long as the time zones, kind of match up, we can really communicate pretty much at any time, regardless of where you are. It really is amazing.
Sure beats that internet cafe and the 56 baud modem. Getting back home.
Checking your CompuServe account, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Not to date ourselves, Mitch. So again, great trip, happy to be back and looking forward to, again, getting back out and exploring some more because my wife and I really, really love to do that. That's the thing that drives us. Like I don't need fancy cars, don't need, kind of opulence on that front, but we do love our international travel on that front. So we talk on one hand, right, about, kind of some of these, older experiences that we get and kind of having that context of how things have changed. I really, I want to discuss today a little bit about, kind of the evolution of infrastructure as we move into this, kind of cloud native type of environment. And obviously that's something that you've spent, a lot of time over the last couple of years, digging into and really studying. And now we're working with a client on a project to, kind of understand a little bit about where, kind of networking is going to in this new, age. So it was just kind of top of mind from my standpoint in terms of, kind of the programmability, right? In terms of, kind of how a lot of these networks get designed, right? Just when I do, kind of cloud networking, kind of projects, we talk about the minimum viable network, right? That's the least amount of connectivity that you need in order for the application to work, because the more connectivity you have, the more attack surface you have. Security best practices, try to reduce attack surface wherever you can. So think about things like the minimum viable network. So all these things coming together, from the perspective of really, again, this generational upgrade to, how we build out and provision the connectivity aspect of a lot of these new modern applications.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch the evolution because before working with Techstrong, I was part of a security startup, and we were just in the early days of virtualization, some of it the network, and of course then being part of a research and running IT in that environment and watching the network go from, we can use these white boxes, right? That's what we call general purpose computers, and things are starting to virtualize. And this includes everything from just normal networks to even telecom cable infrastructure out to the edge, right? All moving to software. And I remember the conversation I had with my best network engineer, saying, well, what should I work on? What kind of skills would be good for me? Do you think I should add? And I said, well, I'd take a Python class. And he's like, what's Python? I said, well, it's a scripting language, blah, 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 blah. And here's why. And he's kind of looked at me like I had 4 eyes, which I did have my glasses on. So it was accurate. And then he went to the Cisco big conference and came back as, you're right. They have this thing called DevNet. They're telling us we should learn software and how to program networks. And now the whole infrastructure, right? The network, and we're talking about network observability and all these software ideas and automation. We called it orchestration earlier, but it's really evolved. It's kind of interesting to watch how it's evolved, which maybe not quite as fast as the infrastructure of the cloud itself, but the network seems now to really be on a fast path.
It is. And I think from a couple of different perspectives, right? At first we kind of just used the network constructs that the cloud providers offered. So you'd have your VPCs or your VNets, depending on the cloud platform that you were there, you would kind of design them based upon the structure that was there, because it was just the way you did it, right? I mean, you were building for one cloud environment and you didn't really think about, kind of other stuff. And now that we've moved into a world where we can't assume just one cloud platform, right? And we need to be able to, offer consistency in terms of, again, controlling that attack surface, really making sure that we're not, offering up connectivity and services that are really unnecessary from that standpoint. So we have to think a little bit differently. Now, is it I want to get rid of kind of the existing constructs and use a different type of network plane and data plane, something like Aviatrix gives you? Is it, an observability thing, network observability thing like our pals over at Kentic, then Thousand Eyes and a number of these other, tools that are really about gathering the telemetry and giving you, kind of a lot more about the why things are happening as opposed to just the what is actually happening. I mean, there's just a lot of different ways, but I think the central point here is that it starts to get integrated into kind of these dev motions, right? You're going to be programming your network, so it's going to run through a pipeline. We're going to be doing testing on it. We're going to, kind of have at least some measure of scrutiny from a security policy standpoint before you start changing things and deploying new stuff. And again, for network engineers, that's going to be a significant change in terms of how they have to do things. So are devs the new network engineers? I don't think so. Right. But our network engineers, as you kind of said years ago, right, you better get pretty good at Python because you're going to be programming your networks in the future, not, plugging them in, using patch cables and the like. Remember patch cables, man?
Oh, the good old days.
The good old days. When you're like, oh, that port's, kind of fried out.
Just satisfying connecting those devices.
Exactly. So it really, it's going to require this evolution. And I think a lot of folks, like when we went from, token ring to Ethernet, back in the day, there were a lot of folks that, did I date myself with that one? But there were a lot of folks.
No, I just had a little pain in my side when you said token ring, but that's a different.
No, that's age, Mitch. That has nothing to do with token ring.
Thank you. I'll see my doctor about that.
So, there was resistance to that. There was resistance to folks using a graphical interface to configure your networks, right? As opposed to the command line. Well, the pendulum swinging back and forth. Like we're using the command line, but we're programming towards it, right? So again, pendulum swings back and forth. But ultimately, the thing that really resonates here is that there are going to be significant changes in how networks get built in this new, this new world.
We talk about paradigm changes, right? And it's rarely is it here's A, which is completely different than B, and now A never doesn't apply anymore. I think it's more of an evolution in this case. And to me, the two big trends that are influencing how we think about networking, first of all, because you brought a cloud native, and we're talking about that in terms of networking. The software, the applications, the infrastructure, they aren't this big blobs of things that do stuff and have APIs on the outside that manage ingress and egress to like a network would. We had APIs to kind of control the hard outage of the application, right? And what happens inside, nobody saw. Now with microservices and service mesh, it's all APIs, and a lot of it is exposed. So what used to be kind of libraries and linked code and all those kind of internal RPC communications and all that kind of stuff is really now APIs going through an API gateway that might be managed by a Kubernetes cluster or clusters. And it's a network inside the application. And I think it isn't something you can easily put your arms around, because the other thing that's happening is it's not static. It's not this quarter we're releasing this, right? Maybe you are in some environments, there are those, but we're moving to and doing more semi or regular continuous delivery. And so the network's changing underneath it, because also the stack, the Terraform code, the cloud environment, the vendors are upgrading stuff. It's a moving target. It's not like the days where we could rack them, stack them. We know what version of Cisco OS we're running, or whatever OS. It's a very much a moving target. And I think that sometimes can be a big head fake to folks to really like, okay, that is different. And now how do I think about things in this environment?
Yeah. And I've seen a couple of different deployment models there. One is, again, what you described could be framed as anarchy, right, to these folks, because again, they're building different things. There's a network happening, there's service mesh, there's sidecars, there's, a bunch of different mechanisms to, again, kind of manage, operate and monitor, kind of the connectivity that happens with these application structures. And then you have the folks that, let's call them the nostalgians, right? So the nostalgians build a walled garden that looks an awful lot like their data center in the cloud, right? And they've got this, and they use the same IP addressing scheme, and they have, again, all the same, kind of traffic flows, and, they don't use the term transit networking, right? They call it hybrid, and they've got, kind of their big firewalls on both ends of them. And Lord knows what it costs to run a friggin', huge firewall on a cloud instance. I mean, you're just like, really? You're going to do it that way? Okay. because that's what they're comfortable with, right? That's what they understand. Most of their world still resides within this on-prem environment, and they're really extending to cloud as opposed to rethinking what cloud looks like and then leveraging a transit infrastructure in order to get access to the resources that you need on-prem. So, again, we're kind of in this weird, kind of time frame where we're still trying to figure it out. The best practices aren't really defined at this point, which means, again, everything continues to be, up for grabs. But what will be interesting is we still got to do a couple things, right? We got to offer connectivity to the resources that we need, many of which are not in kind of the traditional data center. So we've got to include SaaS, we've got to include PaaS services. A lot of folks are embracing a lot of these managed data platforms, your Snowflake and your, Databricks and the like. And we've got to figure out how we're going to monitor what's happening, right? Because at the end of the day, if the application people have application problems, it's really easy to blame the infrastructure folks, whether it's the workload folks, whether it's the identity folks or the network folks. And you as a networking person better have your act together to go, not me, right? And here's why, I'm telling you, not me, right? Kind of problem in your application, not me, right? And you have to be able to have that level of understanding and situational awareness within your environment to be able to definitively, in a data-centric way, prove that, connectivity is fine, throughput is fine, latency is fine. Yes, we have problems with the application, but it ain't me, right? And I think that level of, understanding just isn't there yet. So we've got a lot of work to do. But again, it's very exciting from the standpoint of being able to build out the network that the application needs as opposed to the network that we have. And when we were growing up, we built the applications and the infrastructure on top of the network that we had, not the network that the application needed. And we made all sorts of compromises that we don't have to do.
Absolutely. It's almost like thinking about the network as a platform, right? It's something that you're managing, it's something that you're monitoring, it's something that you've got telemetry and data, maybe even using open telemetry or moving to that in a significant way. And it isn't a change control process, it's a change flow process, right? Because it's continually changing based on your applications, customers, business type needs. And, it may be tied to one cloud in your private data center, may be tied to multiple clouds. So, there are products that go across clouds. There are things that you do within these cloud providers that are unique to them, but you try to find consistent ways to at least manage it. So it's not anarchy in every cloud, if you will. But I think that's the biggest thing, is thinking about it not as this static object, and not a static that never changes, but static that I have a ultimate control over what I put into my data center. Not so much. Developers and platform engineers and SREs and security engineers and operations folks, engineers, et cetera, are going to go out and do things that you're not going to know about.
That's right. That's right. And it's really about being able to be flexible, right, and adaptable to, getting what the needs of the application are at any given time. Right. So that's interesting. And again, we could sit and chat about this forever, right? I'm an old networking guy. I grew up, kind of doing this stuff. I know, you did as well. So it is really just fascinating to, see the evolution of this and how the practice, continues to evolve. So I'm excited, but I got excited by cloud, right? I got excited by a lot of these things because it does provide a lot more granularity and capability relative to what it is that we can do. So, keep an eye out on a lot of these technologies. We're doing some research on that. So you will see that, kind of showing up in some way, shape, or form in the, relatively near term. And that's what I got on that, Mitch. And any other thoughts you have? Things in your craw about
what's bothering me this week? No, I've had a good week, so I guess I don't have anything to complain about. I shouldn't anyway, but
what I do want to talk about next week. Right. So one, we're all getting together, we're having a big Techstrong exec meeting, early next week. So I'm excited to see everybody. That's going to be a lot of fun. But I do want to dig in too. So we'll do a little, a little preview. But you and Vizard had a conversation about AI in security, and I want to dig into that because one, that's going to be something that we talk about at Techstrong Con. So Techstrong Con on March 16th, I am going to be hosting a panel focusing specifically on AI in security. So obviously want to pick your brain a little bit, but as this is our research meeting, right? I may as well pick your brain in front of everybody else. So I think we'll talk about that next week because, there's a lot of different, aspects, a lot of threads to pull and really a lot of nonsense to wade through right now. There's just a lot of nonsense about, kind of AI and where it fits into everything.
There's, well, we could do it exactly. We'd hold show because I have a lot of views on this. Yeah. And I want to pick your brains on because I have a cloud native session at Techstrong Con as well. And, I think we always rush to it's going to replace humans part of it or replace what we do. And there are times robotics and things like that do have productivity gains. But I think if we push AI to the right kind of problems, it could make a massive improvement and help developers and help managing these environments and change. There's a lot of great things we could do with it. If we don't, get too concerned about the robot overload, it's going to take us, enslave us and, put us to work in the Matrix.
Oh, that's coming, but we won't know that it happened.
Hopefully we're not.
That's the whole thing about the Matrix. You don't know you're in the Matrix.
We won't know. Yeah. We'll be happily at our desk, Mr. Anderson.
That's right. So good. All right. So with that, we'll wrap up. We will see everybody next week. We're going to talk a little bit about AI and security next week. Remember, register for Techstrong Con. So March 16th, do that now. We've got a whole mess of cool, webinars and webcasts. So check out Techstrong Learning to figure out what's happening there. And a number of the research documents that we've been working on, both pulse meters and surveys, are going to be showing up on the research site. In the near term, if I can get 15 minutes to tell our web folks where it needs to go and what it needs to say, which has been problematic. But things are moving along, right? We are making progress. So keep an eye on it. Appreciate everybody listening. And Mitch, if no other further things, we can wrap everything up.
We'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in, and please join us. Reach out to us at info@techstrongresearch.com. You can visit the site as well. A lot of great stuff there already. So even more to come. And Techstrong TV, where we appear here. So techstrong.tv.
All right. We'll see everybody later on. Have a great week.
Take care.
Is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Bob Maley, who's Chief Security Officer for Black Kite, and we're talking about how to survive. Essentially, we are in an era where there's a lot of struggles going on in terms of I can't find enough people, and now folks want me to reduce costs if you're a security executive, and Bob has some thoughts on how to maybe approach that whole thing. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So how do I actually do more with less? Because it doesn't seem like the bad guys have any concern about the economy. They got more money than they know what to do with and all the resources to go with it. And we're now asking security folks to do more with less. And what does that look like? And how do we get there?
Well, I don't think we can. I've been in the industry for a while, and I remember two specific times where I was asked to do that. And when you try to do that, it just makes things more fragile, and it doesn't really work. And I think that today, if that's the focus of people with information security, it's going to be a problem. And there's a different way, really, you have to look at it. You can't really do more with less. It just doesn't work that way. And you're right. The bad guys, they have more and more, while we have less and less.
All right, but the boss at the top of the food chain is telling everybody to do more with less. So what can I do if I'm a security professional? I know we've been telling people to automate functions forever and a day, but it doesn't seem like we made all that much progress on that front. So where should we be looking towards to at least become maybe a little more efficient than we are today?
Well, that whole automation process is, we could probably do a whole other talk about that. There's a lot of automation, but it's are you automating the things that actually are productive and give you value? And I think a lot of times people are just doing automation just to, make appearances. But what's interesting, you say about the folks at the top, saying, do more with less. And I was in a CISO chat group yesterday, and this topic came up. And they conducted an informal poll. And what was interesting is that nobody was actually told to do more with less. 1/3 of them weren't even affected, but 2/3 did actually have management give them some advice that said, as we go through the year, if we want to do something, just make sure the money we're spending actually has effective return on our security posture. And I guess the outlier for that is the group of CISOs that I was with. The fact that they were together discussing challenges puts them in a higher level of information security in my book. A lot of folks I know, they're out there trying to do this whole fight on their own, and they don't have that network. They might be challenged, but I think the majority is. I don't think it's going to be a challenge, to be honest with you.
All right. And yet they are being asked to come up with something that feels like maybe a return that can be justified. And I've always felt it's very difficult to come up with something that looks like an ROI in the security space, because you are trying to prove a negative, essentially.
Exactly. So there's a lot of new thought and some old thought around that. Something called a quantitative risk assessment process. Essentially what that is, it's an effective way that you can look at a particular scenario that you want to address. So let's say I want to spend money to add a specific control to protect, the jewels, the crown jewels of the company, and going through this process, I can actually do a methodology that I input, and then I can understand what's the likelihood of this happening, but more so than that, what's the probable financial impact? So, essentially I can show, well, if this control is not in place, here's the probable financial impact we'll see in the next 12 months. But if I do put this control in place, here's the reduction in that. And now I have a business conversation, because, well, if the cost of the control is 10x less than the probable impact, I've now shown to leadership that what I'm doing is going to be very effective. And if they don't want to fund it, well, then I've also showed them, well, here's that risk that we're going to face. And as a business decision, well, they're more than welcome to accept it. But now I've converted what I'm doing into a business decision, talking about the bottom line, as opposed to, I've been around long enough to know that fear, uncertainty, and doubt 20 years ago was very effective in getting budget. Today, not so much.
Do you think folks are trying to consolidate the security tools and platforms they have to at least maybe not about reducing cost as much as it is, I just don't have enough people to master all these tools, so maybe I need a more centralized approach that doesn't require umpteen number of tools that each team per member has to figure out how to master?
Yeah, and again, there's two sides to that coin. There are those folks that they're dependent upon the tools to do their job, and they think that adding another tool to their tool belt will make them more effective, without really understanding what's the value of me putting that tool in place. So if I've developed a program that I'm always looking at value of those tools as we implement them, I don't think I'm going to have that same type of a aha moment that I don't have enough people. But if I've just been throwing money at things, I remember being at an organization, well, that they had a tendency, they had a lot of money, and they threw a lot of money at devices, at tools, at projects, but they weren't able to move that bubble, to reduce that risk. And so it's just how you look at that. And if you're looking at when you evaluate tools, and you may, if you are in that crunch, understand what those tools are doing for you. Are they actually bringing any value to your program, or are they just doing a compliance check mark? Now, if you're in the financial world, maybe a compliance check mark, you don't have much choice in getting rid of it. But in the real world, that compliance check mark may or may not really reduce that risk. So start understanding the value. What do those tools bring to you? And I just saw a graphic. It's called the Cyber Zoo. And it's a graphic of all the cyber companies that have an animal in their name. The reason I saw it, obviously, black kite, it's a hawk. And so we're in that zoo. But I'm looking at it and I'm going, wow, I know there's a lot of cyber companies, and there's a lot that don't have an animal in their logo, but there's a lot that do. So there's so many companies out there that are producing tools. A good information security practitioner's got to get really down in the weeds and understand before you implement that tool, is it really going to bring you there? Don't listen to the vendor. Vendors will tell you things that have absolutely no connection to your business and your bottom line. Understand, is it really going to help you?
Are we too enamored with tools and platforms and not focused enough on process?
Well, yes. And process is always good, because where does everything usually break down? It's either people or process. And if tools can help you effectively execute processes, and one of those processes is data analysis. We are inundated with data these days. There are so many sources of threat intel, of open source intelligence, of threat feeds. Everybody, it's a nightmare. And tools that can intelligently sift through that information and find out what's relevant and what's important, tools like that, I see value. But yeah, you talk about a process, and in the world that I live in, with our company, third-party risk management, the big tool is questionnaires. And if you're a vendor, you have invariably in that sales process have been asked to fill out a long and burdensome questionnaire. And we go through that process because, well, we've been doing that process for a long time. Questionnaires have been around for almost 20 years now. And, the federal government had guidance that was the best way to assess third parties. And we're still doing that. And well, there's companies now that are automating that process, that they say, well, you don't have to send spreadsheets to do your questionnaires. You can just go out to a website, and we've automated that, and it makes it easier to fill out the questionnaires. But nobody's asking the question, well, are they valuable? Are they actually doing anything? When I'm assessing the risk for that third party, is the information in that questionnaire, number one, it's point in time. The second thing is it's aspirational at best, whoever's filling it out at the organization. But, from my point of view, well, how valuable is that? Is a bad actor going to look at those answers in that questionnaire when they're trying to figure out a way to hack me? And the answer is no. Bad actors don't do questionnaires.
Speaking of processes, we cannot walk down the street without somebody touting artificial intelligence in one form or another. What's your sense of how real is AI as it applies to cybersecurity these days?
So up until about 2 hours ago, it's some value, but I finally got into, what is that, Chat APT?
Chat GPT, I think.
Chat GPT. And I asked it a couple questions, and it scared me. I'll be totally honest with you. If it can, where was that when I was going through college? It's scary. And there's the whole concept between machine learning and AI. They're not the same thing, obviously. And machine learning is extremely valuable in a lot of scenarios, but it's also machine learning that needs to be trained, and it needs to be effective. we do some machine learning things in our platform, and part of that is analyzing all those artifacts and documents that, the SOC 2 reports and those questionnaires. And fairly effective, but to keep it valuable and relevant, it has to continually learn. So it's valuable when you're doing that. And what this next level, this chatbot that it's like, wow, I need to look more into it. It has changed my thought about the future of the influence of AI. It's going to be interesting.
And of course, the bad guys are looking at those same tools and going, "Oh boy."
Yeah. Right. Exactly. And they won't have any hesitancy in using it and acting on it. Whereas in the corporate world, before we use something, we have to go through a process to get it approved. And before we act on it, I mean, it takes us so long to make decisions. The agility, and I talk a lot about this, is there's an agility gap between what the bad actors do and what we do. And they're far more agile. They can pivot in a heartbeat, and they do. It's obvious to watch. We just saw a very unique shift in it's a combination of spear phishing and social engineering that they launched against us. And it's like we did some research and we hadn't seen anything like this yet. This is the first time that we've seen it. And the package that the malware package, we haven't completely analyzed it yet, but it's it's a slow roll. When if you execute it, it doesn't do anything for quite some time because it's waiting for antivirus and things to say, "Oh yeah, you're not doing anything. You're cool." So they've really gotten good, and they just keep getting good. So that agility gap, we've got to learn to think like they do.
Speaking of that agility gap, do you think that the business execs kind of understand that we are engaged in something of an arms race here, or do they think that they're just going to throw money at security and expect an outcome without understanding that there's somebody on the other side of that that's constantly adjusting their game plan?
Well, I think there's those different type of execs out there. I know some of the the latter that you just throw money at it and you should be able to solve the problem, but that doesn't work. You look at some of the companies that have spent a lot of money on security, and their names are coming up being breached. Household names that we all know. And that's not just a one-off; it just continues to occur. But then I do know execs that they have very astute information security leaders that don't just understand security, but they understand business. And why that's so important is that businesses are complex. Every business, there's so many complexities in a business that if, as a security leader, if you don't understand where in your business structure you're most vulnerable and the biggest impact that could really hurt your business, throwing money at security doesn't do anything if you can't connect it to what's going on in your business.
Right. So do you think there's any correlation to the amount of money you spend on security versus your outcome, or is it simply, I could be the biggest company in the world with the biggest budget, but then, I wind up being like the Yankees or the Red Sox. I don't win the championship because it doesn't matter how much I spend. I got beat by a team with, a perhaps not the smallest budget, but a reasonable budget.
Yeah, what's the movie Moneyball? They introduced statistics, and it wasn't just averages. Averages aren't very effective. If you base decisions on averages, the outcome is always going to be bad. But they actually did statistical modeling. They fed data in, and it's not the amount of dollars that you're spending. Are the dollars that you're spending effective? And if you have a modeling methodology that you can tell that, you're going to be ahead of the game. Just because you have a big security budget. Again, look at some of these companies that have been breached. Huge security budgets, but it didn't help them.
All right. Folks, you heard it here. It's all about the proverbial fight in the dog and the size of the dog. Hey, Bob, thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Gary Hoberman, who's CEO for Uncork, and we're talking about codeless architectures and the impact that that's going to have on application development. Gary, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me here, Mike. It's a pleasure.
It's not clear to me that everybody knows what codeless architecture means up front, so maybe you might want to explain that concept, and so we can just get everybody on the same page real quick.
For sure. And Mike, like the journey of technology has been on, as you know, is a journey of abstraction. And we abstract away the hardware using software to create virtualization in cloud. We abstract away the database as a service, and you abstract away the code to libraries. And every vision of an engineer has been, how do we deliver value faster with software and get it to market faster? And the challenge I had, and Mike, I grew up coding my entire life, working on Wall Street, building trading platforms for Fortune 50 companies. And what you start to realize very quickly is when you're creating software, the software is actually where all those vulnerabilities lie. The security vulnerabilities, the performance vulnerabilities, the aspect of support and maintenance. And what it really lies in is code. So as much as we talk about abstraction, it actually all stopped, Mike, at a level before the applications themselves. And these applications are what our consumers interface with, what you and I interface with, what our businesses interface with. The applications themselves are where all the issues lie. That's where all the vulnerabilities lie. That's what we talk about migrating to the cloud and where DevOps plays in. And that's what we test and cyber test. And those applications are created using code. And code itself, by definition, is insecure, vulnerable, and dependent on whoever created it, whoever wrote it. And it's an art form. Like, you could be really good at it, you could be really bad at it. And you could be critical of it, of course. But what I had seen throughout my career, Mike, and I grew up in Fortune 50 companies managing 10,000 engineers, what I had seen was the code that we created, 80% of it, of my budget was spent just keeping that code alive and running, responding to vulnerabilities and technical debt and end of life. And the 20% new technologies we were introducing to the market, the game-changing technologies that we were so excited by, the second it went live, you'd get a report of technical debt. And that technical debt is now things you've introduced in the environment. So it's not 80% of your budget keeping lights on, it's 81% next year. And there's less and less time and money to do the things that matter for the company. And more importantly, it's a never-ending cycle where all you keep doing is introducing tech debt to the point that the organization can't move forward, can't change, can't drive, can't do digital the way they need to. And I experienced this as a CIO. And so what I set out to do was to create a new way to create software without code. And what we call this is codeless architecture, which, as you said, it's a term most viewers probably haven't heard before. To us, a codeless architecture means, number one, no code generated. You can't generate code. Just generating code, all that's doing is creating technical debt faster. It's creating vulnerabilities faster. It's abstracting away more the ability to maintain it versus abstracting away the complexity. And then the next principle of codeless architecture is you can't allow anyone to inject or write code or script inside of the platform. And specifically what that means is you could think of Excel. Excel was a great platform, except when they introduced VBA macros and said, now you can build anything. You could look at ERP tools and CRM tools and ITSM tool sets and project management tool sets. And the reality is configuration is an attribute of those software. They're not a platform to create software. They're all trying to do more by saying, write code, write script. Codeless architecture is a fresh view of software development, and it changes everything you know about software development, from the DevOps to the support to the testing to the maintenance. And what codeless architecture says is, by abstracting away all of your complexity into a readable, open standard JSON document that describes your application 100%, we've basically created a container where the whole world around this container could change, the interfaces, the devices, the support, the maintenance, the end of life, such that our team could take on the technical debt instead of the customer bearing that burden as they do today. I'm curious if does that make sense? Is that something you've seen before, heard before? I'd love to get your feedback as well.
So what exactly is the construct that I'm using to build the applications? Am I kind of connecting various graphical representations of containers together to make something that looks like a process or a workflow, or what exactly am I building with?
So Mike, think about I'll do two popular standards: mirror, mean stack. So you have a stack where it's a database, could be a NoSQL database like Mongo, who I've been working with since 2011. You could say you're going to use Angular or React as the framework. You're going to have a service tier to basically capture the request from the client, talk to the database, do some changes and come back. Your business logic gets centralized. So if you think about that, and we were building something as simple as, give me your social security number and I want to run a credit check on you, and then do some action. So in Angular, you're going to code it. You're going to code it using HTML and Angular framework, and then the database is going to be created. In our world, it's a JSON document. And that JSON document would say something along the lines of, I've got a field, it's a text box, it's 9 characters, it's obfuscated, so no one could see what's in it. And it's protected, only goes one way to the server, can't come back. Social security numbers, you have to worry about PII. And then there'll be another field underneath it that says it's a plugin. When I'm going to watch for that social security number, and when it's entered, I'm going to go external to Experian and pull back a credit score. And then there might be another field described in the JSON document that says, I've got a business rule. And that rule is going to fire to basically score the risk of the customer. And when you think about what we described, it had nothing to do with how is the data stored or presented to the user or orchestrated. So that document, you could open a VI editor, Emacs editor, a text editor, and you could just type it. And now you could load that document into our Uncork operating system. And now we render that into a beautiful experience, mobile, desktop, tablet, or API. Because what I described to you could be a simple way to replace the entire API tier of your firm. The big API integrators, half our deployments today in production are just headless APIs of Uncork, because it's a better way to write an API. Now, with that said, when you think about that interface, you could then, there's abstraction, there's object-oriented concepts where you could bring it into and inherit into another module. You can now render that into a mobile experience. But the reality is, we might render that today using Angular, but Angular is ending life. So we migrate you to React. You don't even need to test your software. It's guaranteed to work. It's fully backwards compatible. Oh, there's a vulnerability. We fix it across all customers. So the benefit is our operating system is designed such that every customer is guaranteed to be on the same version as every other customer across industry, such that when you think about it, it's, Linux is an amazing concept, open source Linux. There's about, 10 times less defects in Linux than any code written outside of Linux because of how many eyes are on it, how many committers and reviewers, how much attention it's getting. Now, reality is, imagine doing that at a level above it, such that there's no code. All customers are benefiting each other for the first time. So if Goldman Sachs does a pen test of Uncork and their apps, they're benefiting all the other customers, BlackRock and everyone else. And if CVS does a pen test, they're benefiting Goldman. Technically, that creates the environment where instead of an application being cyber tested once a year or twice a year, applications are being tested multiple times a day. And with that said, it also needs an environment where performance is critical, support is critical, reliability is critical. And that's the areas where no software is ever tackled. And with that said, back to what you said, I created a text editor, I typed it in, that's great. The reality is we created our own beautiful drag and drop IDE to create the software. And we have about 15,000 creators certified and trained how to drag and drop and say, let me drag in a text box, let me drag in a plugin, let me fill out these details. Now, with that said, what we've then built in is all the governance that you would expect an enterprise software needs and has, because I lived through this. So you can't deploy it to UAT until it goes through your change process with all the approvals needed. You can't You have one-click rollback, one-click diff between any versions. You could even, like a time capsule, go back in time and try an older version with older data and see how it worked. So you don't need to go to Iron Mountain and pull paper and logs anymore. Everything's built in. Test management, regression testing is built in. Release management, planning, all the aspects are built into the software. You don't need GitHub anymore. You don't need Atlassian. You don't, now if you want to integrate, that's great. We have that integration. But the reality is you're able to create software instantly that would have taken months and years. You do it in days. And that's the biggest difference.
We hear a lot about low code and no code. Are these kinds of an instance of no code, or do you think codeless is different and apart from those architectures?
Yeah, it's interesting. So low code, no code, if you look at the tools, some of them have been around since 1983. Most of them were created in 2001. And you could segment those two tools into two series. Mike, you could say there's a big set of those tools that just generate code. Some generate Java code, some generate .NET code, some generate mainframe code. But my first platform I built was 1994 for Bankers Trust, and I was a kid out of college, Mike, and I always say the best engineers are also the laziest engineers. And so they asked, they're like, "Hey Gary, we need you to build this money transfer system using C++, talking to Sybase." And and I looked at this and I said, "It's pretty easy. And if I do it well, all they're going to do is ask me to do another one of these, and that's kind of boring." So I created a system in 94, which you filled out a series of tables and answered questions, and it generated the entire application. And in 6 months, every transaction in the private bank of Bankers Trust was through this. Every trade, every fixed income, equity trade, every transaction. And it was beautiful. But when I left there to join Smith Barney and go into brokerage and trading, what happened was they had to replace me with 7 engineers because all that system did was generate code faster. It doesn't mean it's generated well. It doesn't mean it's easier to support. So it's really interesting because the Forrester study that was just completed, Mike, what it really highlighted is what I've lived through, which is if you're a technology leader and you care about your business value you bring to your firm, you care about your budget, you care about doing more with less, all the things you have to deal with, you view code as a detriment to that because the more code, the harder to support. The more it costs. And so 70% of the respondents saying they're being burdened by the past, by being pulled away from things they want to do to support the code of the past. And they view this codeless future as the future as we do. But the reality is code generators just generate code faster. They should never be deployed. They shouldn't exist in this world. There's no question. The other half of the low code, no code tool sets, they allow you to script code. So Mike, the way I would say it is, each of them has solved a very simple problem. CRM is a simple problem. I've coded probably 6 CRM systems from scratch in my life. And it's simple. Simple table structures. ITSM, extremely simple problem set. Project management, simple problem set. They all basically get you to a point and they say, hey, use this framework, start here, and get 75% there, and then code the remaining 25% using our custom scripting language, whatever that might be. And the second you write that code, because I've done it, I was the biggest customers of all the firms that you could name. And the second you write that one line of script, you're locked into a vendor, locked into a version. There is technical debt that you've created up the wazoo, basically, and there's no way to get out of it. And every single time I've done it, I wish I never started it. And the problem with that is if you and I were both engineers sitting next to each other and I supported equities and you supported fixed income, and we both said, let's start with name the low code tool. Like, let's use that tool. We're both starting from 20 years ago. We're both starting from a 20-year-old time machine. And the reality is, if you need a wizard in your app to say next and previous, and I need a wizard in my app to do next and previous, we're going to code that from scratch completely differently. So it generates a large amount of revenue for strategic integrators who basically could replicate that wizard for both of us and say, hey, Mike, I could do this for you for $1 million, and Gary, I'll do it for $1 million. And they're just replicating the same thing. The second you say in a codeless architecture, no code allowed, what it means, first off, is we need to be able to handle every single programming construct thrown at us, from linked lists through integrating to 320 integrations back office to mainframe integration every aspect of legacy integration you could dream up with pixel perfect presentation, replacing your BPM tool, replacing every aspect of what you do. That's what we've done. The second we've done that, you and I are both starting where the last customer left off, as opposed to 20 years ago. So if one of the large investment houses or big banks or healthcare companies or providers or federal government who uses Uncork said, hey, Uncork, I really wish you had a slider component. I need it instead of a number typing, a slider component. The second we created that, you and I would have that in our toolbox. And if tomorrow someone else came along and said, I wish that slider actually stopped at this level and had limits and starts, and we enhanced that the second you and I have it. So there's no more concept of what version of Uncork you run on. Everyone's running on the same version. And everyone's benefiting from each other in that case. It's my simplest area is I'm sure you remember the days of I used to support my traders with a server under my desk. Janitor kicked the plug out, trading stopped. Like simple. But that's a bad thing. So what do? You pick up that server, you move it to a data room. The engineers are playing Doom on the network, took down the data room. Great, that's not going to work. Move it to a data center. And so the consolidation and abstraction in hardware got to a point where you would walk in a data center and it looks beautiful with all the lights, but in reality, every single machine was unique and different. Different CPU setup, different memory setup, different configuration, different disk setup. When my app would go down, I would pray there was a part in stock. Now, the reality of cloud computing and the beauty of what it did abstracts it away and says, you, the engineer, you're creating the software, you should never think again about, is it Intel or AMD or Seagate or Fujitsu or whatever the devices are. And by doing this abstraction, we can now support, secure, maintain that data center at scale across 100% of the customers. We could keep the parts in stock and replace them instantly and move you over when there's issues. We built that at the application level. So we sit above the cloud, and now you could build applications with that same abstraction concept. And that's what's unique about Codeless.
So what is the challenge in getting people to wrap their heads around that? Because it does seem like we have all these folks using traditional tools to generate code, and that keeps going on and on and on. So from your perspective, what's it going to take to make that shift, or what keeps them over there?
Yeah, so I was there in the days when Java first came out. I built the first ever Java system for Citigroup and to 10,000 brokers. And I remember I also managed at that time a mainframe group. And we cross-trained the mainframe team on Java because we wanted them to actually learn it. And so I remember the days when mainframe programmers and COBOL programmers would say, Java will never take off. There's no way it could do what we do. And of course, and so with that said, when we talk to the business leaders, the CEOs that know why they want to do something and then you talk to the CIOs who manage their teams and say, this is what's important to me, time to market. The business needs time to market. CIOs need cost efficiency. They need to be able to do that and say yes to the business. At that level where we've been working, we get 100% support. Top down at the top level of executives, you could dream up with the best names, hundreds of customers named. So with that said, that's how we drive big transformation. It's a large change in an organization. So first off, we have to convince you, the customer, we are more secure than any system, and you should trust us to store your most confidential PII data, privacy data, social security numbers, date of births. Absolutely. And we do that. And we are really good at actually explaining the how and why that makes sense. However, Mike, as you know, if you go to the new COBOL programmers, let's call them, so the legacy programmers who are hired to create code, and they're being measured on how much code they output, which is a ridiculous measure. They would basically look at us and say, this is, I'd rather code it. And so it's really interesting if the decision maker is pushed down to an engineer whose job it is to code, they will always choose a low code platform that enables them to still do what they know is code. But when you look at the success we're having with our customers, it's the top down leadership approach. You're saying, this is the game changer. This is what's going to enable me to create my next HR platform, onboarding platform, my next trading platform. This is how we shut down Excel completely. So we have several customers who are migrating Microsoft Excel fully into Encore and shutting down Excel. for business purposes. Excel is a great tool, but it should never be used in a business line of business. And so with that said, like that is exactly what we go against. It is, I will tell you, Mike, it's the largest transformation in technology is what we're driving, because once you do it, all the tools around it changes. Suddenly the Atlassian tools, the security tools, all the needs change once you actually break it down to there's only one rendering engine. There's only one way to build software. And that's what we're excited to drive.
All right, folks. Well, you heard it here. We're not quite sure how sustainable the current approach to writing code is, but there's definitely new approaches starting to show up out there. Gary, thanks for being on the show.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you again.
All right. And back to you guys in the studio.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had some amazing interviews with industry professionals to give you the latest in the tech world. We'll be back again on Thursday, so we hope to see you then. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.